In addition to my gratitude towards the organizers of this conference, Professor Zilderius, Professor Meloni, Dr. Cadedu, Signora Tedeucci, and others, I feel compelled to begin my lecture with words of appreciation to those of my colleagues, both present and absent, who have shown unreserved support for my people and country in this tragic and difficult hour. We mourn all innocent lives lost and pray for justice and lasting peace for all. In Isaiah's words, I want to talk today about intersection of linguistic and theological developments that played a crucial role in shaping the religious landscape of the last 2 millennia. I believe that introducing the concepts of Judeo-Greek linguo-theological revolution and transcultural monotheism and focusing on their connection, seeing the former as the catalyst of the latter, and the latter as an unplanned result of the former, may help us understand many phenomena of religious thought that we today take for granted, but which originated in Hellenistic Judaism. The most pivotal shift in the evolution of Abrahamic religions occurred when Hebrew faith was transplanted into Greek soil, giving rise to what may be termed transcultural monotheism. This linguo-theological transformation aligned with important shifts, not only political developments leading to the internationalization of the Greek language, but also more profound cultural processes amending, augmenting, and replacing myth with speculative thought. In other words, Moses' spiritual message had to evade Alexander's political infrastructure and Athenian intellectual tools to enable Judeo-Greek creativity. The transcultural expansion of Second Temple Judaism, including its Christian variant, beyond the Semitic realm, brought new challenges. Jewish original theological constructs bound to their idiosyncratic linguistic forms and built into specific paradigmatic structures had to change. The new linguistic tools intended to meet the inner needs of the Hellenistic Jewish community eventually became a factor of universal impact. Although early Judaism was not the only ancient religion with universal ambitions, its universalization became the most consequential and is better documented. Changing historical conditions of the old and new Israel brought them into collision with ancient global languages. We see Aramaic and Phoenician removed from this status by Greek-speaking Macedonians and Latin-speaking Romans after Alexandrian and Punic wars, the rise of the Latin West and Latin diglossia versus new ecclesiastical languages of Eastern churches, Islam's successful solution to this tension by imposing the language of religion as everyday language on the part of former Roman imperial territory, the Reformation that challenged linguistic hierarchy introduced ethnic, so-called national languages. This meeting is conducted in English, and who knows what awaits us in future. Another manifestly universal language is numbers. As we'll see today, that its potential as such could be perceived already in late antiquity. Thus we enter here not a field, but rather a minefield of language and religion, seen usually through the lens of translation studies, a field shared by post-structuralism, analytical philosophy, and cognitive sciences. I'll mention here only the tension between Willard Quine's thesis of the indeterminacy of translation and Donald Davidson's thesis of radical interpretation. The former states that conceptual systems are too holistic for being adequately translated, which for our purposes means the impossibility of what we call transcultural religion, while the latter postulates that conceptual systems can be related. We can discern both approaches already in antiquity, where we find a conflict between innate tendencies of linguistic particularism and transcultural ambition. Linguistic particularism understood that a change of language is a change of God. like names of God in the same language, are his hypostasis, moreover so in different languages. Religion is a system of concepts that crumbles in translation. On the other hand, the practical needs of an increasingly integrated humanity left no choice but to integrate conceptual systems, although the question of the extent of adequacy of these integrative efforts may remain standing up to these days. Greek-speaking Jews, not only of Alexandria and Antioch, but also of Caesarea, Jerusalem, and Tiberias, had to deal with this challenge. And they developed solutions that paved the way for transcultural monotheisms, in plural. For this purpose, instead of undertaking the impossible task of, in Julia Kristeva's terms, transposition of one science scheme into another, they gradually developed a new conceptual system based on both Hebrew and Greek systems. With this understanding in mind, I started a series of studies of early Jewish, including under this term also early Christian, religious terminology, whose original meanings and functions can be elucidated only by the complex and reciprocal relations of Hebrew and Greek. I found certain encouragement in the fact that validity of this approach was corroborated by the fact that the mere application of it enables so-called desk discoveries, that is, recognition of phenomena hidden in plain view. My first two studies deal with the terms for Lord and his cardinal mode of manifestation, revelation, the two terms that in Greek, I claim, make sense only in their transcultural and translinguistic existence. Both studies have been already accepted by Harvard Theological Review. One of them, in fact, been already published and now is accessible online. It examines various ways in which apocalyptic studies can benefit from the introduction of the term and concept of Gilayon, a reconstructed Hebrew counterpart of Syriac Giliana and the Judeo-Greek apocalypses. Another accepted paper dealing with the name of God is still forthcoming, and I presented here only briefly its main points for the first time. The central idea of Jewish thought, the concept of the one and only God, the sole creator and ruler of the universe, developed through elaboration of a set of terms, enabling the possibility of referring to this original theological construct. These Hebrew designations of God, his names, titles, and attributes, you see only some of them, some borrowed from existing cults and other unprecedentedly original, underwent transformation as they evolved towards a monotheistic conception. Devising names for God is a linguotheological development that has in fact never ended. It continues in our days, having been transplanted to multiple cultural contexts. However, during certain phases of history, it accelerated, becoming more productive and influential. The transformation of religious terminology that occurred when the Hebrew faith was exported onto Greek soil became the basis for all subsequent developments. The Hellenization of God was similar to and different from the long, painful, and inspiring process of reduction, or if you prefer, promotion, of Old Semitic deities to the names and titles of the Hebrew God. Both processes were intercultural and had immense consequences for religious and secular thought. The main difference is that the latter process was shorter in duration, has much better documentation, and belongs to the period when speculative thought began to displace myth. Among the nearly 100 terms and metaphoric and descriptive epithets applied to God in the Hebrew Bible and early post-biblical Jewish literature, the most significant and least translatable was the name of 4 letters, the tetragram or tetragrammaton. The most common equivalent for the tetragram came to be Greek kurios, often in its contracted form, kappa sigma, as you can see in the last line, which combined a diverse set of meanings, ranging from the mundane master lord to the royal, humane, or divine lord with capital letter. This polysemy has been partly inherited from the biblical usage by the English word lord and its equivalents in other languages such as dominus, signor, herr, gospod, etc. The introduction of kurios, as well as its equivalents in many languages, proceeded not without deliberation and resistance. The inadequacy of any term to be applied to the concept of the monotheistic God caused and continues to cause unceasing attempts to introduce alternative terminology. The demand for alternatives and surrogates appeared already in Hebrew usage. The situation with finding a Greek equivalent for the tetragram was complicated by the fact that during the period under discussion, oral usage of the ineffable name had already become extremely limited. Thus, two functional forms coexisted, the original written, but now tabooed form, alongside with various Hebrew and Aramaic substitutions. As was formulated later in the Babylonian Talmud, God says, I am not pronounced as I am written. Therefore, the Greek word could render not the tetragram itself, but its substitutions in Hebrew and possibly Aramaic, such as Adonai, Maran, Ribon, Shema, etc. Since the meaning and connotations of both forms of representation, both original and substitutional, were relevant in Semitic usage, both had to be taken into account when translating to Greek. It was, of course, an impossible task to translate this Hebrew name. The Greek term inevitably failed to express most of the diverse elements of content contained not only the tetragram itself, but even its most common Semitic substitutions. However, the incongruity of Greek equivalents was much more striking in relation to the tetragram itself. It's not surprising that some Greek translators simply gave up on the challenge and kept the Hebrew word intact, sometimes in Paleo-Hebrew script, or even left an empty space into which the Hebrew word was probably supposed to be written later. Compared to the Hebrew tetragram, Greek kurios provides a functional description instead of a name, and thus contributes rather to theology than mythology. However, in addition to bringing new opportunities for theologizing the term in certain respects, it also brought theological constriction and the loss of a wider exegetical perspective. This is because the Greek term lacked a number of the tetragram's semantic and functional characteristics, such as verbal meaning, the quality of a proper name, uniqueness, and moreover, its phonetic, graphic, and numeric values. Before introducing my new analysis here, which relates mainly to the last point, it's important to demonstrate what pains ancient Judeo-Greek translators were prepared to take in order to overcome these deficiencies and to preserve at least some of the characteristics of the tetragram that could easily be lost in translation. These include verbal meaning. The tetragram verbal meaning to be or cause to be, actualized in the Hebrew text of Exodus and Hosea, was lost in kurios and other equivalents. However, it found actualization in the substantivized participle ho'on or to'on, the one who is the being, which translated Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, of the book of Exodus. This term was frequently used as God's name by Philo, also some later authors, but mainly by Philo. Proper name. The very existence of ancient Semitic gods was connected to their ability to be called by name, as we know from Enuma Elish. This entire sphere of name mythology and mysticism would be lost with the substitution of a descriptive title for a nomen proprium. Some biblical verses, in fact, do not make sense unless the proper name is meant. The fact of its existence and magic powers was known also to learned Greek, pagan, and Christian authors. Uniqueness. The Hebrew version of the name was not only personal, but also unique. The Greek equivalent was anything but unique and could bear other religious and profane meanings, from deities and demons to worldly rulers and masters in the widest spectrum of senses, related to ownership of property and slaves, authority over disciples, or even polite address. Thus, in addition to losing some original meanings of the Semitic surrogates of the tetragram, the Greek title gained new meanings absent in the original forms. This profane sacral polysemy of kurios enabled cases of confusion or intentional play among the meanings of master, teacher, king, and divine being. This situation could and did cause certain confusions for religious thought. Phonetic value. Despite the tendency to taboo oral usage of the name, its phonetic form has been transcribed into Greek as iota, alpha, omega. Maybe here. No, don't. Here. Iota, alpha, omega, and other similar forms. This Greek transcription of the Hebrew form possibly gave impetus to the development of a new theological and rhetorical device in Revelation. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the two letters adjacent in this form. Graphic value. Another example was furnished by graphic imitation of the Hebrew letters by means of visually similar Greek ones. P iota, as witnessed inter alia by Jerome, who greatly regretted because some people also pronounced it like this, so it was not a huge success. Numeric value, based on the information presented heretofore, one may receive the impression that Jewish Greek literati, while going to great lengths to express diverse meanings and features of the tetragram, totally neglected only one aspect, its numeric value. Is this likely? This study suggests that the numeric value of God's name not only was not neglected, but on the contrary, was introduced with clarity for an authentic target audience. Drawing upon the well-documented graphic identity of the Hellenistic sigma and digamma in the form of lunate sigma, like modern Latin C, I will demonstrate that the nomen sacrum kappa sigma, a commonly employed contracted form of kurios, used as an equivalent of the Hebrew tetragram, was isomorphic to the Greek alphabetic numeral kappa digamma, 26. Thus, it must have been devised as an isopsephism of the Hebrew divine name. Yud 10, Hey 5, Vav 6, Hey 5, 26. This suggestion aligns well with the fact that the majority of supposed cases of isopsephism, numerical value of letters, found in the Hebrew Bible are also based on the number 26, a numeric representation of the name of God. This frequent graphic identity of the numeric digamma and the sigma is known to paleographers and corroborated by Greco-Egyptian papyri. I will deduce only one example out of many instances. In this manuscript of Revelation, dating from the 3rd century, the number 6 appears twice. You see it, it's marked by red. So it's digamma, number 6. Here you see it appears again in the number of the beast, 666. Again, it looks like sigma, also marked by red. And here, exactly the same sign is used for sigma in the word we are discussing, kurios. So kurios and 26 are written in the same form. Not similar, identical. In all these cases, the number 6 is undistinguishable from the letter sigma. Thus, kappa sigma, the main Greek equivalent of the tetragram, the most common contracted form of kurios, was completely undistinguishable from the Greek numeral 26, the numeric value of the tetragram in Hebrew. These two forms were perfect homographs. two additional factors further enhanced their identity. First, the contracted form of abbreviation, in which only the initial and final letters of a word are denoted, in contrast to suspension, in which the end of the word is omitted, was not known in this period outside Jewish Christian texts. It must have been a Hellenistic Jewish innovation imitating consonantal writing and based on earlier tested West Semitic practices. Thus, when this abbreviating convention was introduced, it required a special effort to recognize it as such, whereas the numeric signification of such abbreviations would have been much more readily recognizable. Second, the identity of kappa sigma as a number was enhanced by the use of a macron, superlinear horizontal stroke above the letters, while outside the Judeo-Christian Greek tradition and its successors, the macron was used mainly for numerals and never for abbreviations. In fact, our hypothesis positing a numeric significance of kappa sigma may suggest a solution to the questions of why all nomina sacra were presented, unusually for a general Greek reader, in this semi-numeric form. The very choice to present the name of God as a number might also lie behind the choice to use superlinear strokes for all other contracted nomina sacra. The perception of kappa sigma primarily as a number could be intensified by its mundane usage. For example, on coins. Here you see a Macedonian coin from the 2nd century BCE. Here it's just a sign for year of Alexander III of Macedonia, so it's 26. It's written exactly as curious as Lord in Jewish in early manuscripts. Or another coin, which is in this case 2nd century Nabatean coin, again 26 is written, it is depicted exactly in the same form. Thus, outside the Jewish Christian usus, this sign could signify only a number and nothing else. At the same time, when found in Jewish or Christian text, it becomes, for a competent reader, both nomen sacrum and numerus sacer. The name which cannot be expressed in words, as Irenaeus put it, was thus conveyed by means of a number. In addition to representing an original numeric value, kappa sigma served additional purposes. As we have already noted, it aided in distinguishing between the sacred and profane meanings of curios. In early manuscripts, there is a noticeable effort to employ the contracted form for the former and the full form for the latter. It becomes clear now why the abbreviated form was chosen for the divine name and the full form for the mundane usage, rather than vice versa. The association of kappa sigma with the divine name went beyond mere convention. This sign was a form more closely related to the tetragram than was curious. Furthermore, this usage also sheds new light on the possibility of early Benitarian Christology, when kappa sigma with its enhanced divine associations was applied to Jesus. In the case of kappa sigma, however, we are dealing with interlinguistic isopsephy, where the numeric values of letters in one language are signified by letters numbers of another language. And thus, the numeric identity is found between the forms of different languages. Such Hebrew-Greek isopsephies are attested not earlier than the 1st century CE. Among the most famous are the number of the beast of Revelation and the numeric value of Hebrew David, 14, lying behind the symbolism of 3 sets of 14 generations in Matthew. Irenaeus discussed the importance of using Hebrew, proprium Hebraeorum linguam, and not Greek, for isopsephic speculations. Hebrew-Greek gematrias have been proposed for Ascension of Moses and Apocalypse of Baruch, and one more nomen sacrum, The suspended abbreviation iota eta for Jesus, which is homographic to 18. With regard to the letter, Larry Hurtado has proposed the Hebrew isopsiphon Chai, Het Yud, alive in Hebrew, and 18. Thus, Kappa Sigma may be not the only nomen sacrum homographic to a numeral with the Hebrew isopsiphon. It is noteworthy that the majority of supposed cases of biblical isopsophism are based on the number 26, a numeric representation of the name of God. You see here a list of many examples, all I could find in different studies. As you can see, for example, beatitudes, Ashrei formulae, are found 26 times in Psalms, or the refrain, for his grace is forever, Leolam Hasdo, is repeated 26 times in Psalm 136. Or Jacob's blessings contain 26 verses, and so on. If we accept these calculations as meaningful and not accidental, then the symbolism 26 would become the earliest attested case of Hebrew gematria. This might have been based solely on the numeric value of the tetragram, which would not be surprising given the centrality of this term for Jewish thought and religious practice. The numerological significance of 26 can be observed also in the New Testament, the last line on the slide, in the usage of the Johannine I am, ego eimi sayings, which identify Jesus with the Father. In a manner similar to the patterns observed in the Hebrew Bible, it occurs precisely 26 times in the Gospel of John. Kappa Sigma represents a widely attested phenomenon, that of the name number, which is observed most often with the names of deities. The focus of the numeric value of God's name in Hebrew, and more especially the complete identity of God's name and number in the numerus sacer nomen sacrum Kappa Sigma, should be regarded in the content of the graphic identity of the names of gods with other numbers attested in Mesopotamian cuneiform documents from the 8th century BC Akkadian to the 2nd century BC Parthian. For instance, the sign of the moon god Sin was identical to the number 30, the name of the sun god Shamash to the number 20, and Lil, the head of the Sumerian pantheon of God, to 50, and so on. This is not yet isopsephy, since numeric value is assigned to whole words instead of letters or their combinations, but the result is the same, meaningful homography of God's names and signs for numbers. Greek isopsephy is applied most often to proper names. The Pythagorean tradition associated numbers with gods, so it's no wonder that its isopsephic names often belong to gods, like Isis 420, Serapis 662, deified Roman emperors. The deity Abrasax is addressed by its isopsephonic number 365. The name of Mithras as well was known to Jerome as an isopsephon of the same solaric number. Christians applied similar numerological practices to their deified figures. Numbers could substitute for the name of Jesus, who were called episimon, a letter for 6, because, as Irenaeus put it, Jesus is a name arithmetically symbolical, consisting of 6 letters. And there are many other examples which we don't have time to discuss. Conclusions. It can hardly have been a coincidence that the nomen sacrum Kappa Sigma, a perfect isomorph of the Greek number Kappa di Gamma 26, became the main equivalent of the Hebrew tetragram, which has the very same numeric value. What remains is the question of how to date this phenomenon. Most of our knowledge of Hellenistic Judaism comes through Christian hands, and it's often difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish pre-Christian Jewish heritage preserved in Christian sources from original creativity confined to Christian groups. Therefore, the observations presented in this paper may be interpreted in at least 2 ways. First, Curious could be a Hellenistic Jewish innovation that devised an inventive way to connect the widely used curious to numeric value of the tetragram. An even bolder theory would assert the precedence of kappa sigma to the term's full form, thus explaining the very choice of curious by numerological considerations. In other words, kappa sigma could have been initially and intentionally devised by early Jewish translators in order to preserve the numeric value of the tetragram in Greek. In this case, it would be justified in regarding kappa sigma as a relic of an original Jewish tradition that, first, introduced the Semitic mode of contraction instead of Greek suspension, second, used with such contraction the Greek mode of presenting numbers with the macron, and third, chose curious for the name of God, all in order to preserve the numeric value of the Hebrew tetragram. Preserved by Christian, kappa sigma was imitated in their new names numbers, such as iota, sigma, for Jesus, and so on. These could have been modeled after it or devised independently based on the same graphic phenomenon. This interpretation has an advantage of explaining why nomina sacra were presented in numeric form. Alternatively, as it is unknown to early manuscripts or inscriptions that are undoubtedly Jewish, kappa sigma might have been just one of the Christian names numbers that are attested in Christian sources of the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. Kappa sigma, abbreviated curious, could possibly even be secondary to iota eta and iota sigma for Jesus, and imitate their numeric isomorphism. However, even if a Christian invention, kappa sigma, being based on Hebrew isopsephism, must have belonged to the early Jewish Christian community. Whether curious and or nomina sacra, including curious, were originally Jewish pre-Christian or were introduced by Christians, it's now evident that the distinction between the profane and sacred meanings of curious for the use of its full and contracted forms was not merely a convention, but a consequence of contracted forms' close association with the tetragram. Furthermore, due to the same association, the application of curious to Jesus and the consistent effort to differentiate it from curious in the mundane sense, as attested in early manuscripts, may have played even a more significant role in early Christian binitarianism than is usually attributed to curious, thus potentially tilting the balance in favor of the early high Christological hypothesis. The introduction of the name number kappa sigma became possible by a synergy of several overlapping innovations, some of which may be connected to 3rd century Alexandria. These include first, the graphic development of Greek writing, which produced the homography of digamma and sigma. Second, the regular introduction of alphabetic numbers, most probably following standardization of Greek scripts on the basis of Ionian alphabet in the 4th century. Third, the subsequent introduction of Greek isopsephy. Fourth, the invention of contracted abbreviations and their marking with the sign reserved for numbers, macron. And fifth, Hebrew-Greek translations, in which the former novelties could be implemented. This could have been possible only if Hebrew alphabetic numerals, documented no earlier than the late 2nd century BCE, were already in use, at least during the 3rd century BCE. Such a circumstance is not improbable in the light of the scarce but obvious evidence for West Semitic letters used by Phoenicians as numerals for their dated coinage already in the 4th century, and even earlier but conjectured evidence of biblical isopsephy-based numerical symbolism, and specifically the abundance of the number 26, which accounts for the absolute majority of these cases. Moreover, there is no need to conjecture an early existence of Hebrew decimal additive system when the 11th letter is not 11 but 20, like in the Milesian Greek system, since the isopsephy of the tetragram doesn't involve any letters above 10. So it could have been based on a more archaic system of ordinal numbers when the 11th letter is 11 and not 20. All these factors produce an opportunity to create forms that answer to certain intellectual needs. The graphic isomorphism of names and numbers was only a specific case of the wider phenomenon of paronomasia that played an important role in constructing ancient Israelite and early Jewish theological discourse. At the same time, various forms of numeric symbolism were deeply integrated into Hellenistic religious and philosophical thought. Multiple precedents of names, numbers, isopsephy, including interlingual Hebrew-Greek examples, and other graphic verbal numeric plays, reflect the widely attested fascination of ancient Jews and Greeks alike with similar intellectual inventions. This makes our reconstruction of the numerical considerations underlying the introduction of Kappa Sigma and some other nomina sacra at least probable. Thank you.